Saying I've got a list of the most insulting kinds of DLC for you sort of makes me feel like I'm telling you that I've written a list of all the ways that water is wet. But look, let's be fair, there are lots of great video game DLCs out there. But we're not talking about those today, we're talking about the crap ones. Not the specifics, mind you, though I'm sure plenty of games will come to mind as we wind our way down this list of consumer-unfriendly business practices and publisher penny pinching. Instead, we're talking about the 10 kinds of video game DLC that we often come across, which we wish we didn't. While there has been a lot of backpedaling from publishers and developers trying to bring DLC back to a consumer-friendly place of late, we can still have a grumble about the times they tried to take us for a ride. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 most insulting kinds of video game DLC. Number 10. Pay-to-play side quests and chests. This is an especially painful one, as plenty of microtransactions and DLC can be ignored if you don't want to engage with them. Well, not in this case. For our first spot of shame, we're putting the spotlight on what seem to be perfectly normal side quests and chests scattered throughout the game world, only for players to discover they're pay-to-play or pay-to-open. One particularly gnarly offender in this instance is Dragon Age Origins, which included an NPC who would beg you to complete a side quest in Redcliffe Village, as NPCs tend to do. No harm done there, except this particular NPC requires you to actually spend real-world money in order to take the side quest on. Along these lines are chests that can only be opened with currency and in-game items acquired by spending your money. We're looking at you, Middle-earth Shadow of War. This is even worse in the instances of these two games and those like them because you've already paid for a full-price game before being asked to part with even more money for extra content and gear. Number 9. Day 1 DLCs. The Day 1 DLC, if it wasn't free and put in the game simply because it wasn't ready by the time the game shipped, they're rarely received well. There's very little a developer or publisher can do to convince gamers as to why Day 1 DLCs weren't simply included in the base game, particularly when you're paying for a full-price game. It just seems money-grubbing and shady to ask players to spend even more of their hard-earned funds on what you could safely assume is content that was already developed and designed to go part and parcel with the base game. Whether we're pointing the finger at Mass Effect 3's Day 1 DLC or the Bioshock 2 DLC where the content existed on the shipped disc and buying the DLC essentially gave you an unlock code for it, none of it looks good from a consumer side. Of course, if you can get another $15 from gamers, it looks pretty good from the business side, but EA and 2K absolutely paid the price by garnering a lot of ill will from their fan base for these ones. Number 8. Non-cosmetic items. Non-cosmetic items, pay to win, and pay for progress all sort of fit into the same category here. While these items can almost always be purchased with some sort of in-game currency or discovered in the game with enough time and effort, these sorts of DLC packs and microtransactions prey on your lack of time and energy. Want that really cool sword in Assassin's Creed Odyssey but can't be bothered waiting until it pops up in the specialty currency store that only rotates a few different items every week or day? Not to worry, grab yourself some Helix credits and you can get it right now. Now, admittedly, I devoured Odyssey, and this is the only instance for this particular list where I did fall off the wagon and actually requested Helix credits for Christmas so I could make my horse look like a unicorn. But non-cosmetics are always a slippery slope. Even though they don't fall into the same category as loot boxes, since you always know what you're buying, the fact that there are entire development teams dedicated to making cooler looking and better functioning gear, so you'll be sorely tempted to gear up your character, feels a little gross. While there are generally ways of obtaining this gear without spending money, it's purposefully designed to be a tedious process that you might prefer to avoid. Before we move on, this point also absolutely includes all of those bonus experience packs that are absolutely designed to prey on your dopamine receptors to help you level up faster and give you resource packs. While all of the above are a little annoying, by far the worst offender is the Star Wars Battlefront style pay-to-win DLC packs and microtransactions. Single-player games offering non-cosmetics is one thing, but when a multiplayer game is won by whoever spent the most on their souped-up gear, something has gone very wrong. Number 7. Minor map packs. This is another great example of how DLC packs and microtransactions may affect single-player games, but have a much more negative effect on multiplayer games. Enter paid minor map DLC packs in games like Call of Duty. Understandably, some of Activision's bigwigs decided this was a great way of getting more money out of their players. But for the consumers, minor map packs are a problem for a few reasons. First off, often the amount you're playing and what you get in the pack doesn't stack up well as a value prospect. But more crucially, these kinds of DLC packs fracture the player base. With a game as popular as COD, this doesn't generally present as much of an issue with finding matches as it might with a lesser-known title, but it still separates the players into those who forked out for the maps and those who didn't, and that's not a great thing. Separating the player base, even though you know your audience is huge, rarely goes down well with players, especially when that player base can't necessarily join each other's games, simply based on the people who wanted to spend more than the cost of the base game and those who didn't. Number 6, unlock all. This is an especially cheeky one designed to get players who might have been able to resist the odd map pack, costume microtransaction, or day one DLC. The Unlock All packs are essentially marketed assuring you that all you have to do is put down one, almost certainly significant payment, and then you'll have every possible thing that can be unlocked in the game. This particular sort of insidious sits somewhere between pay to win and repaying for a complete edition set with all the DLCs unlocked, where a season pass might show you everything that's possible to unlock in the game, but you know it'll take forever to actually get them all. These are generally formulated with something very cool down the end of that season pass that you'll really want to get your hands on, so you'll be tempted to turn your real world money into whatever fake world currency that is so you can unlock everything at once and get all that bonus gear. While this kind of DLC has many people scratching their heads as to who would want to bypass gameplay progression when surely the entire purpose of buying the game is to play it, clearly it has enough appeal that we keep seeing it crop up in all sorts of games time and time again. Number 5, Complete Edition upgrades. Since we've already mentioned it, Complete Edition packs also seem like they're trying to get you to spend more money on a game you already own, especially if you skipped out on a DLC pack here or there. Complete Editions hit the same sore spots as a lot of the other entries on this list. They can make you feel like you have to rebuy the game, they guilt you into believing you're saving money, or that by not buying them, you're missing out on the definitive experience. While they can be a great buy if you never actually bought the base game or managed to nab them on sale, they're otherwise often seen as a cash grab. Number 4, loot boxes. There's no way we were going to get to the end of this list without mentioning loot boxes, and though there's a little bit of overlap between loot boxes and non-cosmetics, often loot boxes do contain cosmetics, so that's better, but the fact that you have no idea what's going to be inside it is a lot worse. Spending real-world money on randomized gear, cosmetics, and the like has become such an issue, governments are beginning to legislate against it. Whether or not you agree with that or where you stand on gambling, it's pretty understood that loot boxes are absolutely insidious, preying on your dopamine receptors with tempting wind-ups to opening them, bright colors, and big sound effects only to realize you got, like, a hat or something. But maybe you wanted that hat. It probably depends if it was a common hat or a rare hat. While many loot boxes can be obtained through regular play, there's almost always a nearby notification telling you that if you just spend real-world money, you can get a whole pile of them ready to be opened all at once. Number 3, unlockable characters. Unlockable characters beyond a healthy roster in a fighting game are one thing, but when games launch with a pretty bare-boned roster, only to release a bunch of paid DLC with extra characters, fan bases unsurprisingly feel a little miffed. This is a problem in the case of games like Street Fighter V, Dead or Alive 6, and WWE 2K, which uses its accelerator feature to try and tempt you into getting more wrestlers. While Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has proved there is a right way to do unlockable characters without having your fanbase turn on you, plenty of games, particularly fighting games, continue to get it wrong by nickel and diming their players to the extreme. Number 2, tacked-on endings. Asura's Wrath and Dragon Age Inquisition are iconic games for a couple of reasons. The first being, they're both really great games. The second is, their endings happen in DLC packs. While Dragon Age Inquisition's Trespasser DLC and Asura's Wrath's final episodes are arguably epilogues, they still represent the endings of their respective stories that a lot of fans argue should have been included in the game at launch without costing players extra. It sort of feels like the true ending is being held hostage behind a paywall, and the player is left with a lose-lose situation of missing out entirely or having to spend more money. The only exception to this one is instances like Mass Effect 3's Extended Cut, which was released as a free download. Then again, EA had pretty much maxed out on fanbase ire by this time in Mass Effect 3's development, so they didn't really have any other choice. Number 1, horse armor. While microtransactions and DLC have evolved and changed a lot over their multiple decades in video games, some things remain the same. In this case, that's horse armor. This entry will seem a touch weirdly specific compared to our other entries, but bear with me. For the uninitiated, horse armor is the insidious penny-pinching microtransaction that really got Insidious DLC packs off the ground. When Bethesda asked you to pay $2 to get armor for your horse in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, 1,000 memes launched. Dollar signs appeared in the eyes of video game corpos everywhere, and the games industry would fundamentally change forever. Though this 2006 example has remained an infamous icon of truly insulting poorly valued DLC, it's worth pointing out that we're now in 2023, and what can you buy? That's right, horse armor. In Diablo 4, one of this year's biggest games, you're still being tempted to buy horse armor, except they call it mount armor now. The shop icon sits permanently at the top of your screen with an ever-present exclamation point, the tempting cat toy of the RPG player's world. A quick perusal of the menu suggests horse armor is now going for approximately 10 to 17 Australian dollars, so that $2 horse armor isn't looking so bad now, is it? Either that or inflation has clearly hit the digital equine equipment industry more than we thought. In any case, in the final entry of shame it goes. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section which kinds of DLC bother you the most. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.